recording.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because we're recording, I'm gonna be now introducing you, so in a more formal way. Okay, so we are very excited to have Mai Thu Perret here with us today, and I personally have been deeply interested in her work for quite a while now. She joins us from Geneva, Switzerland, where she was born and currently lives and works, and it seems quite rigorously, as it was difficult for me to be able to encapsulate briefly her many, many, many accomplishments, awards, and exhibitions. She studied at the prestigious Whitney Independent Study Program, received her BA in English Literature from Cambridge University. She participated in the 54th Venice Biennale, was awarded the Zurich Art Prize, Manor Cultural Prize, Prize of the Swiss Foundation for Graphic Arts, Kiefer Hablitzel Prize, Swiss Federal Prize for Fine Arts twice, the Zuger Kultur Stiftung Landis and Gier, the Moving Museum Residency in Istanbul, Turkey. She is represented by and has had numerous solo exhibitions since 2003 at David Kurdansky Gallery, Simon Lee Gallery, Hong Kong, London, and New York, Gallery Barbara Weiss in Berlin, and Gallery Francesca Pia in Zurich. Other significant solo exhibitions include Gallery Quinn in Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam, Badischer Kunstverein, Karlsruhe, Germany, Spike Island, Bristol, England, at MAMCO, the Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Geneva, Switzerland, NICC in Brussels, Belgium, Nasher Sculpture Center in Dallas, Le Magazine, Grenoble, France, Aargauer Kunsthaus, Aarau, Switzerland, Haus Kunstrutiv, Zurich, Theatre des Usines, Geneva, Swiss Institute, Contemporary Art, New York City, Hard Hat, Geneva, Switzerland, Timothy Taylor Gallery, London, University of Michigan Museum of Art here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, the Aspen Art Museum in Colorado, Praz del Valde, Paris, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, Kunsthalle St. Gallen in Switzerland, The Kitchen in New York City, Atelier Medan, Switzerland, Bonn Fountain Museum, Maastricht, Netherlands, the Renaissance Society at the University of Chicago, Illinois, Chisenhall Gallery, London, England, Center of Contemporary Art, Geneva, Switzerland, the Modern Institute, Glasgow, Scotland, and Glassbox in Paris, France. She also has upcoming solo exhibitions at Swiss Institute Rome in 2022, Sophie Taubert Arp Zurich in 2021. She has participated in numerous landmark group exhibitions in prominent museums and art centers across the world, including these countries. They were just too numerous for me to put in, so I'm going to just say the countries: US, Switzerland, France, England, South Korea, Portugal, Germany, Austria, China, Poland, Mexico, Greece, Italy, France, Georgia, Spain, Brazil, Senegal, Scotland, Latvia, Jordan, Belgium, Japan, India, United Arab Emirates. It was an incredible list, let me just tell you. Welcome, Mai Thu Perret. We are so happy to have you with us today and for visits to studios during this week.
Thanks for having me. And I don't know. Yeah, I guess I could. Should we switch over to my video, to my slideshow presentation? So let me see. I should.
Do you have her as a co?
Wait, how did we do it before?
Yeah, so if you just go to your bottom share screen,
and then should it run?
There you go. You got it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, so yeah, this is very chronological. I'm So I think I'll start with a little bit of sort of personal background information, because it sort of helps to understand, I think, the shape of my work took, especially at the very beginning. So I was born in Switzerland from a Swiss father and a Vietnamese mother, and I grew up in this very international environment. And when I was a teenager and a young person, before going to college, I really thought I was going to be a writer. The arts interest, really the art part of my life came after writing and after literature, and really reading, and literature was always my first love. And I guess this is why I went to Cambridge University to study English literature. And I guess at the time when I was a student in the UK, I think one of the reasons I went there also was because of music, because this was the 90s, a time at which there was tons of amazing independent and sort of also dance music coming out of the UK. And I had this sort of fantasy, I think, about England, which turned out to be a little bit different in real life than I think in my teenage daydream. But I really, I had this sort of idea about, going to England and the counterculture, I would say, and similar and parallel to that, in Geneva, where I had grown up, there was a really large squat scene. So Geneva is very, it's a small, very international city in Switzerland, a tiny, wealthy European country where actually there was not, a lot of the, I would say, cultural advances of the 60s came very late here. So it was a very conservative place where women only got to vote, I think, in the 1980s. I mean, as in the last place in the last canton, the last state in Switzerland, I think only gave women the vote in the 80s. I mean, that's kind of incredible. And so in Geneva, for example, there wasn't really, student movement or May 68 like there was in the US or France. This happened much later. This was delayed. It happened in the 80s, late 80s, and it gave rise to this huge squat movement. So basically, young people and a lot of people who were studying at art school and younger artists started taking over buildings in the city of Geneva that were empty because of a very classical story, I guess, because of real estate speculation. And they started moving into these buildings and establishing, taking them over, building, making their living there, but also building places for parties and places for exhibiting art. So this movement was really vital and important when I was growing up as a teenager. And it kept on being quite important to me when I was a student. And this is where I met, this is kind of a long-winded explanation, but this is where I met all the people, basically all the artists who sort of introduced me to contemporary art and made me realize that art was not only painting and not only, painting and drawing and sort of more classical mediums, which I felt I had sort of no knowledge or probably no talent or no drive for, and showed me all these things about contemporary art from the 60s, performance and so on, that became very inspiring to me and sort of, I guess, pushed me to start thinking about making art as well as writing stories. And so when I finished university, I had lots of friends who were in the arts and artists, and especially I'd met people in New York who were artists. So I moved to New York and I started working. I got a studio. I started living with people who were in art school, and I started making my own work, which was mostly abstract painting, very kind of hard-edged abstract painting, geometric abstraction, things that I still love and things that are in a way quite Swiss, if you think about it. But I was never really comfortable with that work. So I was making that work, but I couldn't really justify it. And I had a problem with how arbitrary my artistic decisions were, you know, why this color, why this pattern. I needed some sort of system or reason to hold it all together. And so at some point I came upon the idea of inventing a story that would group everything together and would sort of give the work a system. I was really, I guess, influenced by conceptual art, you know, things like Solowit, you know, that there is an idea that is the machine that makes the art. I really wanted to have a machine that kind of took the I mean, not necessarily the responsibility, but the arbitrariness of making the work out of my hands. And I sort of wanted to make the work of many people somehow. I had this thing, this idea, which I think really came out of also literary precedents and models, sort of modernist models, that the work maybe could be the place of many voices and not just one individual narrow voice, that of this girl who came from Switzerland and blah blah blah. And you know, I was really I studied a lot of modernist writers, and I had this I sort of wanted to, you know, I sort of believed in this T.S. Eliot idea that art is the extinction of personality. I somehow wanted to get out of all this stuff, out of all of this stuff. And so I started making up a story, because this is also what I knew how to do, about a group of women who lived in the desert in New Mexico. And this was partly inspired by trips I'd taken to the Southwest with friends, and I'd visited communes there, and I knew also about, you know, people like O'Keeffe, or lots of artists who had lived there, and also hippies who had established there. And for me, also, I guess, from my sort of Swiss point of view, or definitely East Coast point of view, this was very sort of exotic, and a kind of, it was kind of a utopian place, or, you know, a place where I could establish a kind of free blank slate, I guess. I mean, obviously it's not a blank place, but this was the idea. It was like a narrative, you know, model. And so the reason I'm saying all this is because, so this first image that I'm showing you is, I think, the first thing I ever showed, and it was a small vitrine in Geneva, and in Switzerland, where I put a small blanket that I had, and kind of Afghan blanket that I had crocheted, and then it had a little sign that said New Ponderosa Year Zero, a little skull that actually came from a bigger lamp that I had made. And then there was a rope and a text, which was a diary entry written by a young woman, about wanting to creating, you know, moving to New Mexico, putting together a commune with friends, and moving away from the city, jobs, alienated labor, all these things that, you know, they hated. And this picture, and there was a picture there, which I'd taken from a feminist book from, I think, the 70s, called Our Bodies, Ourselves, which is a very famous book. And it's a picture of a woman climbing a tree, which I always thought was really kind of beautiful and wild and very cool. So this was this first thing, and it showed how how I was trying to group objects with a narrative. And I kept on writing diary entries of these people. So I started sort of fleshing out the life of these girls, which is, you know, I started basically working almost like, it was almost like an archaeologist or something, where you'd find a trove of documents from a distant place, and it wasn't, the timing was not clear, the placement of the story in time was not, I think, I always try to keep it very, very mysterious, so that you didn't know if this was if this was taking place in the early 20s, if it was taking place in the 60s, or maybe if it was taking place now, or maybe even in the future. It was sort of a very, time-wise, it was always very kind of indefinite. And I started writing all these different things that these girls had written, like diary entries, but also leaflets and kind of manifestos, and, you know, all kinds of things pertaining to their life in the desert, and also to make the stuff from their life, or the design of the objects that they lived with. So the first things I made were really more like design objects that they used, everyday objects like this, which was a hammock, And actually on it, it said Llano del Rio 1917. And Llano del Rio was a reference to a commune in the Mojave Desert in the US that actually existed. And it was a communist commune that lived briefly in the desert, I think, yeah, starting 1917, and which I think died down because urban developers were trying to build up LA and they cut the water supplies and these people had to disappear and go. So there were always these references kind of in there. I made ceramic objects that were supposed to be made by these people. In this case, this is a thing. This is a tea service called mescaline tea service, which contained mescaline tea. I mean, in some shows it contained mescaline tea and some other ones it didn't because it was kind of a problem. But we did serve mescaline tea in it, which was fun. And the shape was taken from the Bauhaus. It was like a weirdly, kind of slightly unwieldy, too big tea service. It was taken from a Bauhaus tea set, and I made rabbit huts for imaginary, for rabbits that women in the imaginary commune would have had, and exhibited them. This was in Switzerland, in Glarus, in this very nice kind of modernist museum where we had the rabbit houses that were like this modular triangular structure, and then outdoors we had these rabbit pens for the rabbits so that they could also go outside and not be inside all the time. So I was making all of this more like design, really paying a lot of attention to the material culture of these people. And then I guess I started getting more and more into ceramics, which is a material that has played a very important part in my work, and which I continue to work a lot. And I think the first reason I got it, I mean, this piece is called 25 Sculptures of Pure Self-Expression, the one that's on the screen now. It's the 4 tables that you see on the picture. And it's groupings of these small black ceramic objects, each according to a fairly arbitrary category. So do you see my pointer? This table is called the male principle. This table was called the female principle. This was called, I think, arts and craft movement, and it was only bottles and pots, so useful, usable things. And then this was an abstract table that was called, I think it was called landmarks and chronograms, but it was an abstract table, and it had all this sort of crystalline objects, this cube, and these elements. Sorry, I have my eye. All these hexagonal elements that you could put together to make a Rodchenko spatial construction. So nesting hexagons, but out of ceramic that were laid out flat. And the reason, I guess, so I think this was 2003. And at that time, ceramics was not so cool in the contemporary art world. I mean, right now, I think we're in the middle of a huge kind of arts and craft resurgence, and people are much more interested in mediums like tapestry or ceramics or textile arts, and there's been lots of shows that sort of want to reevaluate these mediums, which is great. And I think also the boundaries between the mediums are really starting to erode. But back then it wasn't, ceramic was not something that you saw so much in contemporary art exhibitions, and I was interested in it because it was sort of like a female connoted, to an extent, really a female connoted medium, and also that it was also associated to workshops and pottery workshops and sort of, things you do with kids, things you do in prison, things you do maybe in mental institutions or with people, as kind of rehabilitation work. It had this therapeutic quality, and I was interested in all these sort of non-artistic connotations and non-canonical connotations that went with ceramics. So I made all of these little figures, which were all supposed to be, so they were supposed to be the self-expression of the girls in the commune. And I actually made them with other people. So I invited friends over. It was the summer. I took over, my friend lent me her ceramic studio, and I invited lots of friends to come over and make these sculptures of pure self-expression. But actually, I told them what to do. I had lots of lists of what I thought was pure self-expression, and I sort of directed them pretty heavily. And then I structured all of the objects that we made during this workshop along this 4-table system. And the I would say the symbolism was almost like a bit cheesy, like the female principle was a circle, the male principle was a grid, the male principle had a fire, and it's like a bull's head and a horse and 2 men giving each other a blowjob, although this one was stolen, I think, and it was stolen somewhere. And then it was sort of then I remade it. And actually, I think in Ann Arbor, they didn't want me to show it because they were afraid that people were going to be upset with the content, which is, I mean, it's pretty mild. It's not, it's not that graphic. It's like 2 stick men, like about this big. But and then there were the bottles and the abstracts. So and I think this piece was a big deal for me because I started moving away from making the things and the sort of really the architecture and the material culture of the girls, and they started to move more into their I would say their unconscious and their self-representation and their creative universe in a way. I'll move on. Yeah, this is the landmark. This is the abstract table with these things that, of course, are quite heavily also referential to art history, like these pieces of a Rodchenko, and this was maybe a Tony Smith. I mean, it was always the idea that the things in the pieces could potentially refer to, the fine arts or like modern art context. After making this, unfortunately, I don't have very good pictures of the event itself, but I think around the same time, I was invited to make a stand for an art fair. So in this section of the Basel Art Fair, they have this section. I mean, it's a model that they have in, I think, all of the art fairs now, called Statements, where young galleries can show one younger artist in a solo booth, and it's like a presentation of your practice. So it's a small, art fair booth, not a very special, I mean, nothing very special as a place. And I thought, okay, if I have to make something for a fair, I'm going to try to think what would be the equivalent of the art fair for the women of the Crystal Frontier. And I thought, well, actually, I going to the art fair is like me going to the market to sell my stuff. And the women in the story, they also make things, and they also live by selling crafts and objects that they fabricate. So I'm going to turn the art fair booth into a market stand for the production of the women of the Crystal Frontier. So I also wrote this poster. So all of the texts from the story actually. I often print in sort of screen printed posters like this one. And so this, on the right side, you had the sort of the flyer for the event, or the poster for the event, which says bake and sale economics, clothing, propaganda, arts and crafts, higher awareness, autocritique, and things. And then on the left side, you had a diary entry from one member of the commune about one of her friends who thinks selling your art is like selling your body and is disgusting and objectionable. And she says, I think somewhere it says, selling your work is like a form of prostitution. So it was this sort of, I would say, conflicted consciousness sort of enacting itself in the text, in the pieces. And then unfortunately, the pictures from the booth is so bad that I actually cannot really, I mean, they're kind of unusable. But on the booth, there was this, which was these pots that these women allegedly had made on this sort of kind of mock cubist shelf. And then on the floor, but you had these figures, these mannequins that wore, this is why when you first mentioned Dior, I thought you were talking about this, but this is a really old project. This was a collaboration with an old friend of mine, Ligia Diaz, who is a fashion designer, and who at the time was an assistant at Lanvin, the French fashion house. And so in the booth I had on the floor, I decided to make mannequins and to show clothes that the women from the Crystal Frontier had made. And so this is a different version of the same piece where actually it was put up on the wall, like almost like a big department store display. And all of the mannequins were paper mache. I made them all myself, and all the clothes I made in collaboration with my friend Ligia, and all the clothes were influenced by mostly Russian constructivist designs. So we looked up avant-garde fashions from the 20s that were all, I guess, linked to revolutionary ideas about the body and clothing and freedom of movement, and also a kind of very ungendered type of clothing, and also kind of geometric shapes, because this poncho is a circle with a hole for the head and a spiral on top. This jacket is a circle. This has a brick motif. I mean, everything is sort of geometric in design. And so in the booth there were the clothes, the pots, and then another mannequin that I unfortunately don't have any good pictures of. Take good documentation of your work. It really matters, because otherwise you end up like this. So there was one figure with gloves, and then the text on the side, and this was my statements. And this, I guess, got me started on this sort of on this question of on this question of the mannequin. This is another one. Okay, wait. What is happening? I want to go. I'm going to follow the order of the images. Another thing that I did for these women of the Crystal Frontier. This was a kind of an important piece for me. It was called Perpetual Time Clock, and the idea was that the women of the Crystal Frontier were against mechanized time, and they were against the fact that one would have a watch and a mechanical time that would split up. I was reading a lot of theory and philosophy at the time, and came upon this idea that the invention of the mechanical watch and mechanical time was a kind of colonial, totalitarian object or system, because basically it cuts up lived experience into equal pieces of time. And it also means that your time, and therefore your life and your labor, can be quantified and sold. So these women, in a sort of revolutionary move, decided that they would have no watches and no clocks. They would live by the light of the sun, and just by I wrote all these texts about how they would live by the only by the desires of their bodies, and not and not adhering to some sort of synthetic mechanical time. And I made this clock for them, which was a clock with no hands, that included all the activities that they had to do in a day. So there was black, and it was also kind of funny. I always meant these things to also have some sort of humor. So the sort of how do you say, grandiosity of these ideas was also meant to, there was also something humorous about it as well. So but this was, I guess, also an ideal life. So sleep, art making, taking care of animals and horses. The aloe plant was meditation. Reading, this funny thing there was agriculture and agricultural work, so tending to crops and growing your own food. This funny Walden face was psychoanalysis. And then this one was sports, and the shape of the outfit symbolizing sports is the sports costume by Varvara Stepanova, the constructivist artist, which you'll see a lot about in the next images. So then, I continued with this idea of the mannequins. I got really fixated, and I guess I still am, on these figures, on these human figures, as sort of, and at the beginning they were meant to be more like clothes mannequins. Things that you see in the store, but I thought, okay, I cannot buy a plastic mannequin from a shop and put it in my Crystal Frontier story because it doesn't fit any of the ideals of these people. So they're going to make it themselves, paper mache, very simple. But then they sort of, I guess, a whole lot of questions about the human figure and doppelgangers, self-representations, fetishism. I mean, lots of issues that are associated with, I mean, very old, issues associated with the human figure started coming in and sort of, I guess, pushed me to make more of these figures. So I guess I was always fascinated by Degas, the little dancer, the very classical bronze sculpture. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's this bronze of the sort of very disturbing bronze of the little girl in a tutu. And there was this really uncanny thing that happens when you dress a bronze, because of course classical statues, they don't wear physical clothes. It's shop mannequins that wear clothes. And so there is all this sort of fusion between commodity, fine art sculpture, representation of the human body that happens. And I find that, and doll, I mean, just a simple sort of weird power of dolls. All of this, I guess all of this became really important for me. And also, I guess the fact that apparently the first sculptures of the human bodies were figures that were put into tombs to keep company to the dead. I don't know, I was totally fascinated by this idea, which I think Mike Kelly talks about at length in his Uncanny essay. So all of these things were really, I think, sort of there, and with all these mannequins. Strange, I have this. And so, yeah, I started making more mannequins. This one was called the Heroine of the People. So the idea was, I didn't include all the slides from this show because otherwise I had to edit tons of stuff. But Heroine of the People was the idea that was this idea of a monument, and the heroine of the people would be a revolutionary warrior who had sacrificed herself and was about to be hung. So this is a figure that, again, with my friend Ligia, she made the costume, which was this strange mix between a kimono and I guess 19th century army uniform. The figure was wearing a rope around her neck. She was also paper mache, but she was sitting in this position taken from Buddhist statuary, which is it's the posture. I think it's called calling the earth to witness. It's the moment when the Buddha is meditating on his way to enlightenment, and Mara, who's the demon of illusion and fear, comes over to tempt him and to take him away from his position under the tree and from his sort of, his meditative quest, and tries to scare him. And he says, Mara, I see you. And he takes the earth to witness, and he points to the earth with his hand. And this is a gesture. It's a classic gesture in Buddhist statuary. So I took over. I used that gesture in the figure. Please, by the way, if you have questions, do interrupt. So, and in this exhibition, there were lots of other monuments, but they were abstract. I was trying to make a kind of inventory of possible ways of making monuments. And the other monuments were more like abstract objects. But for some reason, I don't have them there. And then I guess the next sort of phase of the mannequins was the Mannequins of Neons, this series. Actually, this one is called La Fée Idéologie, which in English means the ideology fairy, or the fairy of ideology. And this title is kind of taken from a Raoul Dufy piece that's in Paris at the Museum of Modern Art. That's called the Electricity Fairy, La Fée Électricité. And this is more like this revolutionary, again, kind of figure or dancer, but she's holding this neon object. So I started taking, I don't know, I think it was a mixture of seeing Busby Berkeley films from the 30s and and also looking at documents about dance in the 20s, sort of avant-garde dance in the 1920s, and the sort of postures that the figures took in those documents, in the films from that time. And I had this idea of making figures that would dance or play with neon hoops, like this one. And then I made more. I made a whole series of them called Apocalypse Ballet. So all of these are actually referenced from the poses were taken from usually pictures from the 20s. So I think mostly. And this was the way that the same pieces were shown in the Renaissance Society in Chicago. So these pieces were called Apocalypse Ballet, and some of them had the neon hoop as an accessory that they danced with, and then some other, and were wearing clothes that, again, my friend Ligia designed. But then some other ones actually had neon clothing, sort of full neon clothing, and they at this point it wasn't really clear to me. I mean, and I quite like how nebulous it was getting, whether or not these were made by the people from the Crystal Frontier, or whether these mannequins were representations of the people from the Crystal Frontier. It started to slip a bit out of the narrative, the sort of direct, I would say, connection to the narrative. And yeah, so in Chicago at the Renaissance Society, there was also this teapot, which was a kind of like, I didn't include the pictures of what was inside, but there was this large scale teapot that was basically like a pavilion, an exhibition pavilion that you could walk in. So it was made of hammered aluminum in the shape of a teapot, and you could go in, and inside were 4 small abstract paintings on wood. I'll show a couple more paintings afterwards. I guess this was sort of coming full circle to my earlier first paintings, abstract, my dabbling with making abstract paintings. And I think probably there was this, I was making these really small, very modest paintings on wood, and was probably not completely comfortable showing them on their own because they were so small and modest, and had no grand, I mean, the narratives embedded in them were not so clear, maybe, or not so direct, although I think where the imagery came from was very clear. And so I thought of making this huge overblown gallery to show them in this teapot, which is and the teapot was also a kind of a Alice in Wonderland reference. I think it was also not so long after the opening of the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, and I was also asking myself this question about why. Why is the architecture that you build to make art often bigger, so much bigger and much more somehow overblown than what is inside, and why do you need it to be such a spectacle in a way? So it was all these ideas about architecture that were kind of playing out in this teapot. Yeah, and this was in Chicago. I guess, and roughly at the same time, I continued making a lot of ceramics, and decided to make ceramics as wall-mounted plates. This is something I've kept on doing. I've really edited this down quite a lot, so I didn't include tons of ceramics because I could have done an entire hour only on ceramics, but I think maybe it would have been a bit too narrow. But I wanted to make, I'll show some more. This is a series called Heart and Soul of ceramic reliefs. And they're about, I don't know, in feet, like 2 feet high, something like this. I mean, they're big-ish for ceramics plates. These, for example, are little figures wearing the Stepanova sports costume with a hammer and sickle in their hands. They're like little dead revolutionary soldiers. These are spiders. So it's, again, all this imagery a bit similar to the first ceramics that I showed on the table, but mounted onto these big plates that go on the wall like paintings. This is another series that continued where the ceramics really became this sort of congealed paintings. I guess I got really First, I mean, I guess first I fell in love with making, I mean, with the actual making and the time, you know, just the experience of making this work. But I also really enjoy the sort of congealed nature of ceramics, the fact that you are, you know, I don't know if, oh, there's some more coming up. Ceramics is such, when it's, when clay is wet or, you know, before it dries, it's such a pliable kind of tactile and somehow expressive material, and it has this, so it's so you know, you can so easily make something, decide that you don't like it, break it, it starts again. There is this sort of perfect flow of the material, which I really enjoyed, and also just the fact that you can really take prints of things. I mean, all this work of mold making and so on, and just the sort of really yeah, how do you say, physically tactile sculptural quality of and gestural quality of ceramics I found fascinating, and especially in conjunction with the fact that then you stick it in the kiln, you glaze it, and it becomes this sort of hard glass, you know, almost like glass-like object, and becomes really a thing. And also, I think becomes really continuous with a lot of the fixtures that are that we live with and that our body lives with. If you think of the fact that bathtubs, toilets, subway tiles, you know, it's somehow a material that is very, I think, physically, haptically embedded in our experience. And I found it a really interesting medium in which to make things that were almost like paintings. Also because I was always having a little bit of difficulty making straight up paintings. I think this was a way of navigating distance, I guess, the ceramics. So yeah, this is a whole, again, kind of inventory of things from the world, and lots of them that have a kind of psychoanalytical quality, like the rats or the spiders. And this particular series was a disaster. Everything, the first time I tried to make these flat pieces, I don't know if any of you make ceramics, but one thing clay doesn't like is to be flat. I mean, it's fine for being round or a pot or something like this, but it really doesn't like to stay in a flat slab. And so everything broke. I made 45 of these reliefs, and everything broke in the kiln, which was great because I had a show. And I had to show them, and it was disastrous. And so after a few nights of just being really depressed, I decided that we'd glue them back together using this Japanese technique called kintsugi, which is this way of mending broken objects in Japan, where when you have a beautiful teacup or object that breaks, instead of throwing it away or trying to hide the break, you mend it with resin and with lacquer, actually, and then with gold, and somehow you magnified what was a defect and the sign of damage, and of something being no good, then becomes somehow beautiful, and the most beautiful thing about the piece. So yeah, everything in this series had cracks of gold, and it wasn't really not on purpose. It happened. And then later I met a ceramics fabricator that I still work with in Cologne, who with whom things don't break. So I started making things that were in one piece. How are we doing for time? Ooh, I'm gonna skip a few things. Paintings. Do you mind if I just skip along a bit? Because I think I would rather speak about maybe some newer things. So here, some paintings, some of the wood paintings I spoke about earlier, with motifs taken, very often appropriated from earlier art, whether Russian constructivism or Indian tantric paintings, or Sophie Tauber, Swiss abstract painter. This is a neon. I started making also neon signs and neon pieces. Also, often borrowing from female artists. Actually, I'm going to go back to this particular project because it's kind of interesting. This is a film that I showed at the kitchen in 2007 called Evening of the Book. And the idea was to make a remake of a disappeared or of a performance by Varvara Stepanova from the early 1920s that had from which there was no documentation. So I saw a few pictures in the book about this performance by Stepanova, but there was no film and there was almost no information about it. It was called An Evening of the Book. The images were amazing. And so I thought, okay, I'm gonna remake this. I'm gonna invent this disappeared performance, and I'm gonna make it again. And so I made it as a film, filmed at the kitchen using my friends, using sports costumes by Stepanova. It was filmed in 16mm, and then it was projected on top of a wallpaper that was also taken from a Stepanova motif that she had drawn. And then there was, in the cycle of projection of the videos, there was a moment when the lights would come on, music would play, and you would see the wallpaper, and you would sort of realize that you were in this wallpapered room, and that this illusion of having a pattern on the screens was actually just simple wallpaper. And this was, I guess, I decided to go back to this because this was, I think, an important moment for me where I realized I didn't want to just work with this crystal frontier narrative. I needed to think a little bit of more space for my work, and I started looking back. So I started working with figures and stories that were taken from art history, and that were, in effect, I think what I was starting to do was a kind of almost like feminist rewriting of history. So, taking this, for example, this performance that had disappeared, that had been erased, and trying to reimagine and therefore, remake it, reimagine it, and I guess re-inject it into the present as something that had power. So it was also saving things from the past, I guess. And I think these levels of working with things, so this is a display of the objects, of the props from the film in the kitchen in New York, and behind the back wall was the films. And in the main room, I used some of the props, and I turned it into an installation paintings, which I showed. Yeah, I started moving back and forth in time, which I think is something that I really keep on doing. So, for example, this neon is taken from a Helmer af Klint painting. Painter, a Swedish abstract painter that became quite famous now because of the Guggenheim exhibition. But I mean, when I made this, she was less well known, but she some people said she invented abstraction before a lot of more famous male artists. This was the Venice Biannual exhibition, which was in free. My work was in free parts. It was called Flow My Tears. There was a figure which was wearing a dress, which was copied by a Schiaparelli dress. Schiaparelli was a surrealist couture designer in France in the pre-war period mostly. She collaborated with Salvador Dali on this particular fashion collection, and she made these completely surrealist objects. This dress where the skeleton is showing on the outside, for example. This is, I think, from 1942 or something like that. I remade the dress from pictures because it's in a museum and you can't touch it. I used it for a film with a friend first, and then I cast my friend's face into glass for Venice and made it into this mannequin and showed it together with this huge neon and this wall painting that was white on white of the same motif than the giant neon pyramid. Move on a bit. These are more neon works. It's kind of abstract alphabets, abstract trees. A donkey made out of, this was a show David Kordensky of maybe 5 years ago, showing a lot of craft objects. I continued working a lot with craft type objects and craft materials, and I really like working with artisans. So, for example, I found a great wicker maker in Switzerland who made this donkey for me. And the donkey was, I guess, it's called Balthazar. It's the second one in a series of two. There's an older one that's an adult. This is a child, or how do you say, a foal. And this idea of showing a donkey, because the donkey is like the unhorse, it's the working animal, the poor, sort of poor laboring. It's a figure of labor, basically. And it's called Balthazar in homage to the film by Robert Bresson about the donkey. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's a really cool film. And and there were tapestries, ceramic objects on the wall, ceramic vessels. Another performance. I think, how are we doing for time? I'm not. What do you think, Rebecca? How much?
I was just looking. I think you're fine. If we go a little over, it's really fine. So you had said, there are things you really want to talk about, and that would be exciting for us if you just kind of go on your own trajectory,
Yeah. So I mean, actually, now I see where we are. So I'm going to try not to compress things too much. This is a performance piece. So this is, I guess, connected to this idea of the doll and the human figure as a doll and the female figure as a doll, which has become, was always very interesting to me, as in, I mean, it's a very classic thing. What happens if the doll comes alive? The marionette, this. And this was a show called Figures. It's a performance. It's not very long, maybe half an hour long, that I made with my friend Tamara Barnett-Heron, who's there, who's singing. She appears in another one of my performances, and it was her face on the mannequin in Venice. So I tend to work with the same people over and over again. And we went to college together, and she's a poet and a singer. And I made this performance in collaboration with her, this musician called Beatrice Dillon, and Anya Schmidt, who's the dancer who's wearing the mask on this piece. And the idea for this was was taken from bunraku, which is this this form of theater they have in Japan, where they have giant puppets that are animated. In Japan, it's usually, in the real bunraku, I think you have two manipulators for each puppet. You have a person making the mouth, and you have a person moving the arms. And you see these, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but it's completely amazing. You have these giant puppets, and they're moved by these people dressed in black in the back. But you see the manipulators as much as you see the puppet. And it's really the dance of the animate with the inanimate. And it has this really simple, beautiful structure, which we tried to appropriate on this. So basically, I had a puppet made with 3 silicone masks that represented 3 different characters that, I guess, this entity was changing, was kind of shape-shifting and taking different personalities. There was, I believe, an Indian mystic, a computer scientist, and a journalist. I think these were the 3 characters. My friend Tamara wrote songs about these people, or these women, because they were all women. And then Anya, who's there wearing the mask. I didn't include pictures of Anya without the mask, because those are kind of the craziest ones. She first begins by moving the puppet and dances with the puppet. She dances with the puppet and then changes the mask on the puppet. So she puts different faces onto this puppet, which then becomes the incarnation of another character. And then at some point, she just puts the puppet to the side and puts the mask on her own face, and basically becomes the puppet, which is what you see here. And it was this really kind of creepy, beautiful thing of putting a silicone mask with walled-in glass eyes, so she can't see anything. So she's dancing, not really seeing where the audience is, which is always a bit nerve-wracking, because you're always afraid she's going to bump into someone or a lamp or something. And then on the side, Beatrice is making music. Tamara was singing and kind of being the voice of these figures. And I played this this journalist. At the end, the voice has become totally disincarnated from the body, and I just write on this Olivetti typewriter from the 60s, and I'm this sort of scientist actually, I think I did, yeah, journalist sort of reflecting on what I've seen. So it's a sort of a very kind of weird story about artificial intelligence and women and possession, I guess. But it was it's something I really like. I really like to make those performances. Every few years I do one, quite often with friends. I'll show more pictures later. Yeah, okay. Carpets, which were these kilim carpets were made in the Kurdish part of Turkey. So it's following this residency that you mentioned in Istanbul. I made a residency, and the idea was to make work there. And I've always had this fascination for textiles and carpets. Also following this, this interest, I guess, in gendered craft materials and so on, and also in this sort of indigenous craft and so on. And I collaborated with this workshop that works with young Kurdish women who, basically they learn their own ancestral craft, they make carpets, and they also get to go to school. I mean, actually, the workshop doesn't really exist anymore, but I made a few carpets with them where basically I made some simple designs, and then they made the carpets for me. And I think this is what got me. This is the reason why it's there. Okay, this is what got me into this body of work, which you may have seen pictures, called Les Guerrières. This was the show at the Nasher in 2016. Again, using mannequins, these figures. This was just before this was 2016, so it was just before Trump was, it was during the Trump campaign. In France and Europe, the war in Syria was going on. The Kurdish people, of course, were the main, some of the main victims of this war in Syria. And since I'd spent quite a bit of time in Turkey with these Kurdish people, I guess I'd become quite interested in the region and in their lives. And also, it was a time of all these terrorist attacks in Europe. There was the big attack at the Bataclan in France. Everything was becoming super creepy, militarized, really dark kind of time. Not that now is not dark, but it was really dark. And so I think it was a moment of like profound despair, also politically for me. And I was thinking, your ceramics and your abstract paintings and all of this, what does it mean in relation to the moment that you're living in? And I think I like for the work to be sometimes very autonomous and very distant, but then sometimes I don't. And a friend of mine who's an artist sent me a video at this time about the Kurdish freedom fighters in the state of Rojava in Syria, saying you have to look at these videos. These women, it's like the Crystal Frontier, but it's real, and it's war, and it's happening in Syria right now. And so I was a bit kind of nervous, because I hate kind of war porn is not really my thing. I was also, I think maybe being Vietnam War films, like all of this stuff was always a bit close to home, and not really something I was so comfortable watching. But anyways, I watched the video because I trusted the person who sent it to me, and it turned out that there was absolutely no fighting in it. It was just it was the daily life of these sort of teenage or very young women living who were in the army, in the Kurdish Liberation Army. But it was just about their daily life and how free and sort of self-organized they were, and about their everyday life and their rituals. And it was very beautiful and very moving. There was lots of stuff about their dogs, and that, and how they would go to visit their parents. And then, so there was all this everyday life and communal things. And then suddenly it'd be like, oh, and now, we go and we fight ISIS, and these guys are on drugs and they want to kill us. And, so it was this very strange mixture of hyper violent context, but also this beautiful kind of friendship and stuff that was going on. And I got really obsessed with Rojava and what was going on there, which was basically that I don't know if you know about this, but in the fallout of the disintegration of the Syrian state, the Syrian dictatorship, the Kurdish people in the north sort of started freeing themselves, and they established their own basically they started establishing their own government, following very kind of anarchist, how would you say, kind of, communal systems. I mean, I don't want to go too much into it because it would take a long time. But anyways, it was really, they established, for example, representational systems where, if there was a body governing a town, there would have to be a woman. If there was a mayor, male mayor, there would be a female mayor. Like if there was an official who was male, there would be an official that was female. And they set up these female fighting, these armies. And I got, so then I started thinking, okay, I want to make something around this, but I can't make something documentary because I haven't been there and I don't know anything about it. But it's interesting to me, and I want to try to somehow pay homage to these people without, without being documentary in a way, because I didn't feel the right somehow to document them. So it's also a kind of a fantasy, again, like a lot of my work is a fantasy, I think. And so I was making this show for the Nasher in Texas, a museum that's all about sculpture. So I guess it was also a moment where, for me, after making lots of ceramics, lots of objects, abstract things, I could reunite with figures, I guess. And I thought I would make figures that each that would use all the components, all the different materials that I usually work with. So silicone faces, like in the performance, full ceramic figures, like figures made entirely out of ceramics, paper mache, these resin cast guns, the shoes were bronze. And this is a different showing of the same ones at David Kordensky in LA. In LA, I put them up on a pedestal, which you see there. So I had this big pedestal in the middle of the gallery and I had all the figures standing on there. And and I don't know, I think the other thing that matters a lot to this was that I think these pieces were kind of a collage between, I mean, there were a collage in the materials that I used, but there were also a collage in terms of the reference or the influence, because on the one hand, there was this narrative about Syria and the Kurdish, the freedom fighters, but there was also this book by Monique Wittig called Les Guerrières, which is this amazing book about an army of women that take over basically the world, and is a really beautiful book from the 70s that's completely utopian, and people had been telling me to read it for years and I never managed. And then one day I read it, and it was a time when I was making these and I was like, okay, this totally makes sense. Again, it's like the Crystal Frontier, but it's not the Crystal Frontier. It's it's all this, it's a really good meeting. So I showed these pieces in LA in a display where there was one wall that was all ceramic slabs, very mostly flat pieces and pieces that were all kind of hand worked, like, so these ones, I think, you see them better here. These are all like totally textural games of, basically making a slab and then distorting the slab with your hands, so that you get these shapes that are actually the marks of my hand in the material, and then layering glazes on top of it. So this is the square piece before it's somehow handled to make the pieces like this one. And I think somehow to me it made sense also in terms of what is a body, what is a bodily material, what is touch, and what is physicality, I guess. These pieces, organs, they're bells in the shape of female, female reproduction, organs, female and, ungendered, I guess, organs, but a uterus, a heart and lungs, and and they ring. So when you push them, they make a sound, and they're going to be at the High Line in New York now. Actually, I think they're up. So they're like these, almost like these Buddhist chimes or something like this, but with this quite eerie, how do you say, imagery. this is the same in pieces in the show at MAMCO, which was a kind of a retrospective show. But there was this one new piece, that was called, I think it was called the Garden of Nothingness, and it was just this big wall that was also inspired by a Zen type of environment, a Zen type of garden. Okay, I think this is the last one I'll talk about because we're really going over. And this is, I guess, following on to this interest in gardens. This is an installation in Spike Island in Bristol. That was about where I made some research on witchcraft, on this question of witchcraft, and then devised this sort of garden with elements that were taken from the moon. It's called the Temple of the Silver Pavilion in Kyoto, and in Japan, and then more kind of say more directly romantic imagery, like this tree, like this burned tree stump. That is something that you could associate with witches and environments where witches would have been relegated. And we used, this is a doll's house in ceramic that was also placed in the same show, a basket with apples, also masks in the face of animals that the witches are supposed to, I guess, transform. In a lot of accounts, witches turn into animals during the Sabbath at night. So I made all of these masks of animals. And then I think I'll stop with this show, but this was a really amazing show for me because I got to do a thing I'd wanted to do for a long time, which was to make an exhibition that was kind of straightforward sculptural show, objects in the space, very minimal. But then all of these objects are actually props. So you see that this has wheels, for example, and they're all activated during a performance. So this is a performance I made with my students in Geneva at the art school, where we had replicas of the masks in a crystal that we could wear. They designed costumes. I mean, it was a really amazing thing. And we used all of the show as a kind of a, basically stage set. So the flames are part of this narrative about the witches being burnt. And I used this doll's house as a musical instrument. So connecting pedals and contact microphones to the house, and then rubbing the house with objects to make noise. And then my friend Tamara, who's here, is singing inside is sort of singing inside the exhibition, inside the performance. So yeah, this was a really, I'm not going to show the rest because it's more ceramics and so on. But yeah, this was a really project I really loved because for the first time, this had been a dream for a long time to activate sculpture like this. Yeah, maybe it's a good overview, I guess, of some of the things I've been doing. Hope it's not too much information in one dump to 1 hour.
It's great. Thank you, Mai Thu. Do you guys have questions?
I can't see anyone else, but can I ask a question?
Maybe Mai Thu, is it okay if we get
yeah, sure. I could.
take down the screen?
Okay, wait. I have to stop the screen share, right?
Yeah.
Okay, wait. Now I'm on keynotes. Where did the Zoom?
It's down at the bottom if you're...
Yeah, okay, there it is. There it is. I found it. It came back. Stop the share.
Great.
There you go. Now you can see?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I guess it's sort of two questions. I'm curious what the transition was like for you to go from being so steeped in literature and probably knowing a lot about literary techniques and also probably reading a lot to learning, I'm assuming, entirely new techniques like ceramics and all of that. And also those being, so I'm curious about the experience of transitioning from one technique and one medium to another. And then also the kind of culture of both worlds. Like, did you notice a difference in coming from a, Cambridge literature kind of world and into the art worlds in Europe, and what was that like?
Okay, so maybe I'll answer the second part, and then I'll answer the first. I think the culture, or I actually didn't really. The one thing I think that was a problem maybe for me with being a writer. I mean, I had two. I think I had two major limitations as a writer. The first part was that I was really bad at long narrative. I always felt very comfortable doing things that were more like poems or postcard, things that were very short and were like about a particular moment in time. And I found it really difficult to make a plot. And I have some friends, good friends in college who became writer, and these people, they just make plots. And I was always kind of uncomfortable with that. So so that was one thing that I think art was sort of perfect, because you created one situation. So each show or each exhibition or each piece is like a particular situation. It's almost like it's one moment in time. And then these moments add up, which it's less of a, somehow, I don't know, it felt like it was less of a slog, like making this long narrative arc. It almost kind of made itself. So that was the first thing. And then I have to say, I enjoyed the world of my friends who were artists much more than the sort of literary world when I was a student. It was much more fun. I also almost became an academic, and it was just more fun. I mean, art, the scene, even in New York, when I was in my 20s, was so much more interesting. I mean, it was just a more interesting life, I think. And I like the fact that on a more profound level, I think the fact that art allows you to collate very different types of materials and very different types of experiences, so that you can have a piece of text and you can put it together with a sculpture or a drawing, and you can sort of create your own framework with something that I was really I found very freeing. And also, I was never really good at being alone for so long, and I found that the art scene was more communal than this idea of being in your room, isolated, writing your novel, which I really was not so good at. And so, yeah, this links, I guess, to the experience of making art, which is that some of the things like ceramics that I started doing, I first started doing with other people, and friends, showed me how they work, how things worked and how to build things. And then I just, you just do things, and then you learn another thing and another thing. And I also work a lot with, I do also work with fabricators quite a bit. So I really do like to go in and out of being physically involved with things. I don't know. I mean, for example, during this whole pandemic time, I haven't been able to go back to the ceramic studio in Cologne. I've made some ceramics with my students here. Here in Geneva, and I've made some in the studio here, but it's not so easy. And I've been drawing mostly. I've been doing loads of watercolors, which is something I hadn't done for a very long time. And so I think it's like I like to be in and out of different modes of working. I couldn't become a full-time watercolorist. That would not work. But then I like to have sometimes when I do one thing very intensely, and then I make a pause, and then I go back to something else. And I think, for example, performance versus object making, it's like I couldn't do only performance, because these pieces that involve a lot of other people and are very staged, it's so much organization, and it's so much, running after everybody and just being kind of a ringmaster and being on the phone and whatever. And I love it for a while, and then I just want to be alone and, make my coils and build my things and I think this, so I think it fits the way I work. This, back and forth. I don't know if it answers your questions, but making things was at the beginning maybe a bit scary, but also so, I also like really the sort of more meditative aspects of doing something repetitive, something, whether it's a painting that takes a very long time or drawing that takes a long time. I like that too. Or with ceramics, So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, you definitely answered my question. Thanks.
Hi. I was wondering, you talked a bit about your interest in geometric forms
Yeah.
and like that foundation in that. I was wondering, do you have a significance for your use of like circles? Because I've noticed like a pattern of them, and I guess I'm curious, like, is there a narrative around that form, or is it more of like an intuitive?
I think it's quite intuitive. Now I think I know of things that you have said, circles to mean, and they echo or they make sense. So, for example, in the performance, in the images of the blazing world of the show at Spike Island with the performance around witchcraft, the idea with this big abstract banner with the circles was really this moon evocation. I was trying to make something that was this sort of cosmic form. And to me, it was like all of this place was like a moon worship place, and like taking all of this moon related imagery from different cultures and kind of, squishing it together in a way that was a little bit maybe uncomfortable in the sense that I didn't want to make something that was like a visual pastiche, something that looked medieval or something that looked Renaissance at all. I almost wanted it to look futuristic. But then I've used circles in different ways. But I guess, yeah, things to do with, of course, there's a sort of female quality to them, or it's supposedly associated with. I'm always a bit ambivalent with that. But yeah, I think circle, triangle, they have very, for example, in tantric art, they have very specific meanings and resonances. And I'm really curious about what people project into shapes and what I myself project into shapes. And I think in the work, it's more like an exploration of possible meanings than necessarily this means this, the triangle is, I don't know, male power, because in Tantra, it's like, triangle can be a phallic, maybe a symbol or whatever. But I find it fascinating that we keep on wanting shapes to mean something. I find that, and I do it all the time. I do it too, but I find that really just that urge to to make things, to make the most abstract things have a signification is really what I think I try to just key into that, and that. But I also try to leave it quite open. Does that make sense? So,
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hi. So you talked a lot about using like your friends' faces in your work or having your friends make like ceramic work. But you also mentioned in the piece where you have your friends with the machine guns and then the tiles on the wall, that it's your own hand left in the work. And I was wondering about the importance of it being your own hand versus being someone else's hand or being someone else's face, and like how you do that decision making.
yeah, I've made one with my face actually, that sleeps. That's like a silver face that sleeps. I think in the end, it doesn't really matter if it's my hands or my friend's hands. Or my friend's face. I think what matters is that there is this recognition of somehow face and closeness. That, you know what I mean? It's like I don't. Yeah, for me, when I put myself in one of my pieces, it had the same meaning than putting one of my friends in there. Somehow I had to have a pretty personalized relationship to myself. In the sense that I'm, yeah, I'm a person like they are a person, you know, but I think definitely it matters that we are close and that they are portrayed in these things. I think there is something quite poignant or something that is meaningful that their faces, these people's faces appear in there. And then in terms of the hands, I mean, it's more of a, I guess, of a practical things that it's my hands distorting the ceramic. And also it's so much fun doing that I would have a hard time letting someone else do that. But yeah, I think it would be different. That said, it would look different if someone else did it. Just that really silly digging your hands into clay and going like this. If you did it and, you know, or if I did it, or if Rebecca did it, it would be different, which is kind of fascinating. It's like almost like a fingerprint. We just did this workshop with the students at the art school with throwing. So the idea was to learn how to, well, we're still doing it. We basically learned how to throw pots for a couple of months with the help of a friend who's a, you know, trained potter, ceramicist. And it's different. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. There is this, it really flows from the body in a way, which I find totally fascinating. But I'm not making claims for it, you know, I don't know. Does that make sense? Yeah, I'm not making huge claims for it being me rather than someone else. But yeah, definitely it's different people make different things.
No, that makes sense. Thank you.
Hi, Mai Thu. I wanted to ask you about your use of symbolism across most of your work. You deal a lot with abstraction, which I think is really interesting, the way you approach it through various mediums. However, I'm wondering about like the audience that you convey the narrative to, and how do you adjust your narrative to the audience, or how does that narrative and abstraction link up when it comes to like telling the complete story?
Well, I think what I like to an extent about, I mean, the way that I approach narrative is that, of course, I have a narrative and it's pretty, at this point, constructed, but I'm quite aware that other people will not, you know, that many people will walk into, you know, a museum or a gallery and see the work and they'll have a totally different reading because of, you know, maybe different cultural experiences or just where they come from. For example, the guerrière, this thing with the guns in Texas, everyone was talking to me about Texas. And I stupidly didn't really think I was making a comment on Texas, but it turned out to be really that people were asking questions about gun culture and about, you know, what these particular types, I mean, these guns are not, these are AK-47s. These are not really guns that are around in this, it's not the, I don't think it's the type of gun that you find usually when you buy, you know, semi-automatic or whatever gun in the US, but nonetheless, it really resonated with a problem or a question that was very American. That is not this, that when you showed these works in Europe, people don't think the same. And also people kept saying all the stuff about Vietnam. And I stupidly had not thought about it until people pointed it out to me, you know, Vietnam, the particular types of uniforms that I was using that was secondhand, you know, American Army uniforms, and the fact that I was half Vietnamese, and I was kind of like, oh my God, actually it's true. I mean, in the end, maybe I also did touch this material, you know, this is also in the work. So, I mean, I try to be clear as to what I've put into it, and I try not to mystify the viewer somehow with my own explanations. I mean, I like, but then I'm not, I'm also completely open to the fact that other people will read things differently. And I think that's interesting too, because I do get feedback from people that maybe teaches me new things about my own work somehow. And I'm interested in how all the works become figments in a narrative, but they could rearrange differently. Maybe they could tell another narrative. This is something I've always been really interested in, how you can reconfigure a story. And so the abstraction, I guess, comes in there as well. And I've always, I mean, yeah, I always work with abstract, abstract shapes, abstract forms. Also because I think it's like a kind of a pinnacle of I don't know, human cultural achievement somehow. Abstraction. I don't know. It's something that I really like. I really trip. And I'm also interested in how some things look exactly the same, but they're totally different. Like, for example, constructivism and tantric art. There are lots of how do you say, visual correlations, but they come from totally different places and totally different uses for art as well. Yeah.
I was curious about this dialogue that you have across different countries and cultures. As a person that, in Switzerland, I believe they speak several different languages. And I was wondering, how do you mitigate the discourses of feminism between America and Switzerland and France, and how these texts aren't always in touch with each other, and sometimes culturally they're at different speeds. I was wondering, like, how do you mitigate that within your practice, because you do talk about a variety of different cultures?
I think it comes in a quite how should I put it? I think mixing, working with a lot of different cultural materials, it comes quite naturally to me. But then I also try to be a little bit self-critical about the way that I do this as well. That said, the culture of feminism in the US and France has a lot. There's also a lot in common. There's a lot of differences, but there's also a lot in common. And I find it really fascinating, the trajectories of how one thing is maybe born or starts in one place and then is borrowed into another, acclimated, then sold back. For example, now in France, we have all this like outrageously stupid discourse, like right-wing discourse about what they called American gender studies and American post-colonial studies, and they want to make the French people believe that decolonial thought is American, that thought about race, thought about gender, and deconstructing those notions is an American thing. And if you think about it, it's not really true. France was a very, a lot of the important feminist thought came from France. A lot of the people who became very important for American gender studies and even post-structuralism and so on came from France. But now in France, nobody wants to hear about it. In the sort of, and I find that completely fascinating. All these, the way that thought, ideas travel and are borrowed and also changed, I guess. And does that answer somehow?
Yeah, I asked that question because when I was in France, one of the biggest things I noticed is that they had a very different relationship to race and feminism there. This was in 2014. It could be very different now. It's 7 years ago at this point.
I think a huge explosion of interest and from younger people into, an inquiry into feminism and, and also, questions about race and the whole colonial thing. Everybody's, finally beginning to think about it and talk about it, but there's a lot of resistance in France. And one of the things that's can be very annoying is like, using feminism to be racist, for example. That's like a classically French move. That's just kind of totally disgusting. So, but I would say in the end, I had quite an Anglo-Saxon education, even if a lot of the sources maybe are French. So in that sense, I mirror, I think, my own my own intellectual, or how do you say, history, or the way it mirrors something that happened to thought in general. I think I follow this. but it's true that I think in France, people are really, I mean, it's in a way really backwards on some of the issues. Although that's that's starting to change a lot also in schools, and and this is why it's becoming such an issue, in fact. Also because there is a way in France, there is a way that there is this whole idea of universalism that a lot of people are starting to critique, and of course people don't really like it. But I think things are really changing here a lot. I mean, like the whole Me Too thing is really, in France, it's like the last year, it's just been, every month there's like another powerful figure is, revealed for, various, problematic things like, raping that daughter, or, having a pass on their employee. I mean, it's the same in the US, but in France, it's a huge cultural shock, because I think people are now, the younger people are really starting to say no, I think, and to change, to have a different take on this. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I just want to end by saying thank you. And I think it's like call your pig out or whatever there in France. I forget what it's exactly, but it's not exactly Me Too. But I understand what you're talking about.
Balance ton porc, yeah, that's been going on that's been a very powerful movement here. It's just, it's this thing where people start talking and then it all comes out, whether it's racism or sexism or whatever. It's like, and the more people talk, the more other people feel comfortable about talking, and the more everybody sort of, realizes that it's not normal. So I think these things are starting to change here, although, God knows what's going to happen in the next elections. But I think this situation, this sort of very polarized right-wing, left-wing situation is the same. It's to an extent the same in the States. I mean, we are also in a totally insane moment in terms of, like, the right is so visible and so strong. So I don't know. Yeah, I think it's not that different. I mean, there's this cultural differences, and I think France is racist in a different way. I can't really say what is more racist, to be honest. It would be hard for me to say. Yeah. But yeah, and then maybe also this thing with dealing with different cultures and different materials, it also comes from to an extent from a personal, some form of personal history, and coming from different cultures, and also being strong in between, having always been in between two cultures. Yeah.
I have a question so far from the one we were just talking about. So wasn't sure I was going to say it if somebody else had a question. Does anyone else have one? Okay. So you talked a little bit about your friends and the mannequins, and yourself and the mannequins, and the idea of the uncanny is really interesting with the mannequin, or the experience of the uncanny. And I was wondering if it's different, and I don't know if you can answer this because you know these people, but and they are the ones you're making your mannequins after, but is it different knowing them and then seeing them perform themselves and all those kinds of loops that you're playing with that, than having it be an anonymous mannequin, or a face that doesn't resonate for you? Because I would think that if you're looking at yourself, you're mirroring, and that has some different uncanny than your friends. And then if it didn't have any resonance as someone that any familiarity, that would be a whole different thing. And I don't know if you can answer this because you're only working in one way, or in a particular way, but if you could explain more about that or your experience with that, I'd be interested.
It's true that I did make, the only thing I could say like this, I mean, about, experience that I sort of have that I think would answer, maybe help answer this question is I did make a mannequin using the face of a student from the school. And so this was more a case of common friends saying, oh, you should really speak to her because she would be so perfect for one of those pieces. And I spoke to her and she was into it. And so I took a mold of her face. And it's true that I actually love that mannequin because I just thought she was really beautiful and she looks, I mean, she was great. She was really great for the piece, but it's a different feeling than seeing the people I know very well, because actually the masks are always very different from the real people, because I don't make them. I have someone who's quite skilled at doing it, but they're not Madame Tussaud type, fabricators. I mean, they of course they copy the face, but the eyes are incredibly hard to get right. And to an extent, I don't fixate on it being exactly the same. It's not really that I'm asking, it's not like I'm trying to make them make a 3D photograph or whatever. So, so the picture, I mean, the sculpture is always in the end very different from the person. And that's what's really uncanny about it, is that it's always a bit like, oh, it looks like her, but then, the eyes are a bit off and this is a bit strange. And also, and I don't have that with the person I don't know so well, because I don't have this image of her so imprinted in my face that, and we had this when the mannequins were in my old studio, and we had them before they shipped, and we'd been working there late at night, and every once in a while you'd be like, oh, Latifa, and you'd be like, shit, you really felt like she was just behind you, and then you were like, no, but it's just a mannequin, but there's something, it's like this thing you're concentrating, and this figure is standing there. So it does make a difference. Now, I don't know what difference it makes to the viewer, but it, of course it makes a difference. And I do like that it's people that I know, because there is a thing that there are all these narratives about community. And so it's nice to have also a real community embedded in the works as well.
But then you have dots on some of them. You've colored.
The paper mache ones always have the dots usually. I mean, this had a lot to do with my own incompetence. Painter and sculptor. It was like I knew that I could never make a face, so I was trying to find, and I like that the dot is like a hole, and it had this very surrealist thing that there is like this one giant eye, and it's gouache, so it's quite matte. So it's on, for example, I have some figures where the circle is black, and you don't really know if it's an eye or a hole, and it really works, I think, that and it looks also like a canceled out face.
Yeah, exactly.
But I've not done that onto silicone faces. That would, I think, sort of not make sense.
There's a little Balthazar kind of like.
Yeah, exactly. It's blanking out, or this sort of graphic gesture that's erasing, and it also makes it very modern in a very very simple way of signifying. Also, like if you think of faces in a Chirico painting.
Mm-hmm.
They are like this very often. They have like these weird faces that are just like one spot. So I think it brings on all these surreal associations that I like having the dot. But I did like at the Nasher mixing all of the different materials. So the ceramics, the faces that were ceramics, the faces that were real latex, and then the faces that were wicker. And I had a figure that was a real kind of Frankenstein type figure that was like a latex mask on top of a wicker body. And it really was a very nice meeting of those materials together.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thanks so much, Mai Thu. Oh, sorry, Rob.
I had one. Did anyone drink the mescaline tea?
Yeah, they did, because it was at an art fair at Liste, which is this like young art fair, and and people had it, and actually some dealers had it, which was kind of funny. There was one particular guy who was just like, yeah, whatever, I'll drink it. I mean, it was a different time also. But the mescaline tea we did it twice in that tea service. And now, of course, it belongs to an institution, and they don't put masculine in there.
Cool. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
The very undramatic clap. I hate that clap at the end.
So, I'll speak to you tomorrow.
Oh, so you're not on after this, so great. Okay. Yeah, thanks so much and enjoy the rest of your day. It's still early for you.
Nice, actually. It's 9 p.m. almost. Yeah, no, but tomorrow we have some studio visits, I think. So
They're really looking forward to them.
this for the studio visits, and yeah, thanks for inviting me, and I hope I didn't cover too much material in 1
That's
hour.
great.
It's a bit like
Now, the thing that's so great about that is you don't get that any other way. So it's perfect.
it's
Yeah.
true. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.